painting creates that space for people to long. It makes you somehow dive into a universe that is not linear, that is not exactly an illustration of something, but it makes you dream, it makes you question certain things, it makes you maybe, want to go places also or discover things, but I think it creates this feeling of longing. I think living in New York, for me, really stood for some sort of a freedom of mentalities, of cultures. Growing up between Brazil and Germany, I always felt very divided between being German, being Brazilian, and having to choose almost which culture I was more inclined to or which mentality I felt closer to. And when I arrived in New York, I felt very freed from that mission of like having to be either German or Brazilian. I felt like I could be anything I wanted here. And New York at that time felt very much like this melting pot really of different nationalities and cultures, and you met people from everywhere, and nobody was trying to define a certain culture, mentality as such. And I felt, in that sense, I felt very at home here. I didn't have to explain if I was Brazilian or German or how I felt about it. I just fitted in to like everybody else. I was growing up in Brazil, and I looked more like my dad. Like I had the more German sort of features, the blonde hair and the tall, and I always felt like I was looked at as a German or as a European, and I always kind of had to explain, but I grew up in Brazil, so I was Brazilian. And then when I moved to Germany, I felt more integrated, sort of like, I felt like I looked like more people, but I felt Brazilian, emotionally speaking. So it was always a bit of a dilemma, and I was very drawn to looking for a space where I could be alone, I think. And drawing and painting was something that gave me that privacy, because I was also the only one in my family doing that. So obviously I created that strange space for myself where I could hide and express in any language, because it doesn't really have that. I could be whatever I could want it to be in that place. I think that, while I was living in Germany, because there I could have my little bicycle and go around on a bicycle, I started going to see museums by myself, which was amazing, and go to the library and see books of other artists. And that was a big freedom that maybe in Brazil I wasn't able to do as much, especially as a kid, not because I didn't have that freedom to have a bike and just go by myself in São Paulo, obviously. So I think that art became that almost like a private friend, like my imaginary friend that I had conversations with, and I wanted to be an artist very much since my early, childhood. I just drew a lot, and I painted a lot, and I wasn't looking at it in a conceptual way or in regards to history or what I wanted. It was just like a playground. And I feel like drawing and sketching the way I still do, I keep it in that place. The starting point of this was basically trying to imagine a stream of water. And in a way, obviously then thinking of the sea and the waves, how they break, and that dynamic and the movement. So I started to draw somehow, almost like getting into a wave, trying to understand how it breaks. And then with little brush strokes and with a lot of water, just trying to shift basically the pigment around the paper so that it kind of almost creates a narrative of how the ocean is moving, of how the water moves. You know, you do a bunch of exercises of the movements, and then you go to the big canvas with a bit more of a confidence of your movements. So this is kind of almost a pre-exercise of the physical movement almost, and how to shift the paint and how, what you get when you do this movement with the paint and trying to, in a way, follow a wave. And then you do it in the bigger canvas, which is already then a trace that has more confidence all the way, and you do a continuous move. When I look at that painting in the back there that I did after I came back from Brazil, there was a lot of rain while I was there, and the dirt roads are this very incredible dark orange earth, and it was raining a lot, raining a lot. And every day when I would go to my studio, I would pass in the back through the woods, and there was like this place where 2 trees fell down because of the rain, and they fell down with such vigor that the roots went up, and the tree fell in 2 parts. So it ripped it open, and inside that wood was like this complete orange wood, like very, very orange, and then it was wet on top, and obviously the green was even more green, and it leaves an impression that is just almost violent in your brain, you know, like, and you have that orange and that green and that violence almost, you know, and it becomes almost an urgency to paint it. So when I came back, and I couldn't get rid of that orange, you know, the orange was there, the green was there. And after I painted that painting, you know, I stepped back and I see the tree there. So it was almost unconsciously painting that situation, but consciously. So it's a kind of an in-between where you let an image sort of go inside your brain, but you don't illustrate it. You just want to feel the power of that situation, and that power is what kind of moves you to make that painting. I get sometimes so excited anticipating the time that I'm in my studio. I get really excited because it is a very special time, and I anticipate this time. I kind of almost protect this time from my day-to-day life, so I create those bubbles of time where I know I have at least, I don't know, 9 hours for myself, 10 hours. I almost count the time so that I can understand what I want to do in this time and have that freedom and that space that is a very familiar space, and I feel at home in that space. So I think I am the best of me when I'm painting, because I feel light and I feel happy and I'm content overall, and I'm challenged at the same time. And the insecurity to fail goes away, you know, because you understand that the failure is embedded in the process. So it kind of becomes a really pretty perfect space to be for those hours. That's why kind of sometimes I think I create those studios to shelter this like a time capsule that I protect and that I think about how I want, where it should be, so that I can create this universe that is very safe. I think that my relation to water, obviously, you know, there is I grew up in Brazil. We would go to the sea every weekend or to the countryside where there was a lot of waterfalls. So obviously there was stream of water, ocean around me growing up. My name, Janaína, is the goddess of the sea, so which at some point in my life fascinated me as well. I think everybody tries to find out what their name means. But also, I was always fascinated about the idea of like the sea, you know, in terms of why would someone try to build a boat, a ship, to go from one country and discover something else? Like, what was this longing? And I think the idea of longing goes together with the water a lot, with the horizon, with that, you know, trying to imagine what is on the other side, what happens behind the horizon, and that kind of curiosity that drove human beings to all these discoveries, and that, you know, countries went, you know, to go to India and then discovered South America, and obviously those discovery stories always fascinated me, and then all the mythology that came with it, of sirens, of, you know, ocean monsters, of giant octopuses, and Moby Dick. I think is literature that was very embedded in my childhood, and it fascinated me a lot because I would travel in my mind, oversee, discovering things and monsters, and all that I think was a very fruitful ground, you know, for my work, has always been, because it obviously helps you to go outside, to go to a magical space, you know, when you imagine what is inside the sea. And obviously, when I paint, I feel like I want to combine and tell a story in different layers. And as every gesture is one intention, and every gesture also is connected to a feeling, or to a color, or to a mark, then you start layering them to kind of tell a story. And it's a story that obviously is not trying to illustrate an image for someone to understand, like this is a girl meeting a boy, or anything like it, or a sunset, but sort of layering to reveal and also to unreveal. Colors have their own life almost, you know, and I believe very much that also you have a connection, you know, the brain connects to the hand, to the color, in not in a linear way, and sometimes one color calls the other color. Obviously there's colors that I love more or that I look more for, but I think that discovering also different colors, I do like to mix all the colors and to kind of try to imagine a color that almost doesn't exist, but obviously it exists. So the combination of different colors would end up in that color. So I think that the layering is also, to me, fascinating, how I can change colors through layering. You know, if I use a very pale light blue in the background, and I know that if I go over it with a very transparent light, you know, ochre, that this will turn into green, and how the colors will change, which adds a whole game into that layering and storytelling, because then you're playing with, like, using colors but you're not using them for the color that they have, but you're using them to layer, and then for the end layer, then they have a different color. Or sometimes you scratch it open to reveal a color. And I think that the choices of color, they're always based on this sort of image making and carrying around different images that you see and that you store, and then you relate obviously to a situation. So, you know, obviously like some colors are related to a feeling as well, and when you talk about longing or you talk about happiness, obviously we see different colors, and I think for each of us is a different color, but the combination of all those elements create again a story. Figurative and the abstract in my work, they do sort of I'm interested in the border, because I am not interested in, for example, if you do 2-3 brush strokes and it appears to be something that you go there and enhances it. I wouldn't enhance something that, you know, oh, this looks like a dog or a girl or, you know, or a bird. You actually try to always take the figuration away. But I think that there is a little dance and play with it, which I think is fascinating because it can morph. And then it opens up a space. It's not only an abstraction. It could be other things, and it could be, but it's not clear, and it's just fragmented because it's only a little second of a story also. It's just a little point of view of many point of views. So it's always in this in-between. So at the end of the day, I feel like, you know, an abstract painting can evoke more political feelings, you know, than an illustrative depiction of a political scene. And because it moves certain elements that are political in one and that create an attitude of life or of how you respond to your daily tasks and how you look at them and how you let them control you or not. And I think that painting opens up a whole new way of looking at life as well, and it gives you different intentions, different options, which I think is very needed because, you know, I think that during the pandemic, it was a time when I think a lot of people realized how important it was to hear music live playing, you know, and how important it was to go actually see a painting in a museum and not see it in a digital screen. I think that it gave us back that reflection of how much we need art, really, you know, on a daily basis and in real life, and not only in the same format, in the same screen, flat, without touch, without smell, without the materiality of it. I think that painting, for me, paintings create longing. And longing is a feeling that I think is the most poetic and beautiful way of going on about your day. Because longing creates expectations of different formats. They have also sometimes a sadness in it. And sadness is beautiful, the same way as happiness. And that play between those. And I think that painting creates that space for people to long.